He walked into the courtroom like he owned it. Tailored suit, polished watch, that smug half-smile of a man who believed money could buy respect. The kind of confidence born not from hard work, but from never hearing the word no. Across from him sat a woman in a faded blazer, fingers nervously gripping a folder thick with unpaid invoices. She wasn't here for drama, she was here for survival. Months of chasing what she was owed had led her to this moment. To him, it was pocket change. To her, it was the difference between keeping her business alive or watching it crumble. When the experienced female judge entered, silver hair framing her face, robe flowing with quiet authority, he didn't stand fast enough. Already the balance had shifted. He thought he could charm his way through, that his smooth tone and subtle arrogance could outshine facts. But this wasn't a boardroom or a country club. It was her court. And she had a gift for peeling back entitlement layer by layer, until all that remained was truth. By the time the gavel struck, the man who thought wealth equaled worth would be stripped bare, his excuses dismantled, his privilege irrelevant. Because in her courtroom, justice doesn't check your bank account, it checks your character. And for the first time in his life, he was about to find out what real accountability feels like. He was used to getting his way. Nathaniel Chase had grown up in a world where money solved problems before they even began. His father, a real estate magnate, taught him early that confidence could close any deal, and that people respected the man who never flinched when he signed a check. Nathaniel wore that confidence like armor. The crisp suit, the $10,000 watch, the cologne that announced his presence before he even spoke. It all told a story. He was someone used to winning. So when a small business owner named Carla Ruiz dared to take him to small claims court over an unpaid invoice, Nathaniel didn't panic. He laughed. "It's a misunderstanding," he told his lawyer friend over dinner. "I'll explain it to the judge, she'll see reason." It's nothing. To Carla it was everything. Her catering business had been her dream. She'd built it from scratch, working late nights and early mornings, taking small jobs until her reputation spread. When Nathaniel's company hired her to cater a corporate event for 100 guests, she thought it was her big break. He'd promised payment within a week. That was 3 months ago. Since then, she'd sent polite reminders, then firm demands. Each reply from Nathaniel was shorter, colder, until finally he stopped responding altogether. Her rent was overdue. Her employees had gone unpaid, and every time she saw his smiling face on social media, posing at charity galas or luxury golf courses, her frustration deepened. When she filed the claim, friends told her not to bother. Guys like him never lose, they warned. But Carla wasn't after money anymore. She was after respect. The courtroom was smaller than Nathaniel expected. The polished arrogance he'd worn so effortlessly didn't quite fit here. The fluorescent lights hummed. The chairs creaked. There was no mahogany paneling, no grandeur, just honesty, and behind the bench sat an experienced female judge with silver hair and a stare sharp enough to cut through. "Pretense. Case of Ruiz versus Chase," the clerk announced. Nathaniel straightened his tie, smirk in place. Carla looked down at her notes, whispering a silent prayer. "Mr. Chase," the judge began, voice calm but authoritative, "you're being sued for failure to pay a contracted amount of $2,150 for catering services. How do you plead?" He leaned forward, charm dialed up to maximum. "Your Honor, I believe this is just a simple misunderstanding. Ms. Ruiz didn't deliver the full order as promised." Carla's head snapped up. "That's not true," she said, her voice trembling. The judge raised a hand. "You'll have your turn, Ms. Ruiz." She turned back to Nathaniel. "Do you have documentation to support that claim?" Nathaniel hesitated. "Not exactly. But my assistant, is your assistant here?" "No." "Then let's stick to what is here," she said. For the first time, Nathaniel felt a small flicker of unease. The tone in her voice wasn't harsh, it was surgical, controlled. She wasn't angry. She was dissecting him, methodically stripping away his confidence. Carla's turn came. She stood, voice still shaking but stronger now. "Your Honor, I have the signed contract, the delivery receipts, and emails confirming everything was received. I also have photos from the event." The judge nodded, motioning for the bailiff to collect the folder. She flipped through the pages silently, eyes scanning with precision. Then, without looking up, she said, "Mr. Chase, you said she didn't deliver the full order?" "Yes, Your Honor." The judge turned the page, holding up a printed photo. Tables filled with food, staff in uniforms, guests smiling. "Is this your event?" Nathaniel blinked. "Yes, but," she leaned forward. "Looks complete to me." The courtroom went still. Carla held her breath. Nathaniel tried to recover. That's not the issue. It's the quality. Some guests complained. Do you have written complaints? No, but then again, let's stick to what is here, the judge repeated. He shifted in his seat. The air felt heavier now. His smile, once effortless, started to falter. For the first time in his life, charm wasn't currency. And he was sitting across from a woman who'd built her entire world without it. Carla met his eyes then, just for a moment, and something passed between them. Not triumph, not revenge, just quiet certainty. Because for all his money, his connections, his polish, Nathaniel Chase was finally in a room where none of it mattered. And the woman in the black robe? She was about to remind him of that. The tension in the courtroom shifted from polite civility to quiet warfare. It wasn't loud, no shouting, no dramatics, but you could feel it in every glance, every breath, every carefully chosen word. Nathaniel Chase adjusted his cufflinks as if the gleam of gold could somehow restore control. The experienced female judge watched him calmly, pen poised over her notes. She'd seen this kind of man before, the kind who mistook arrogance for intelligence and believed confidence could camouflage deceit. "Mr. Chase," she began evenly, "you claim the services were subpar. What specific issue do you have with Ms. Ruiz's catering?" Nathaniel leaned back, adopting the smooth tone of a man accustomed to getting away with vague answers. "The food wasn't up to standard. My guests expected a premium experience, and well," he gave a small dismissive wave. "It wasn't quite there." The judge didn't move. "Be specific," he hesitated. "Some dishes were cold. Do you have evidence of that?" "No, but several people mentioned it." "Names?" He blinked. "Pardon?" "You said several people mentioned it," she repeated. "Who specifically?" Nathaniel's throat tightened. I don't recall exactly." The judge's expression remained neutral, but the silence that followed was devastating. It wasn't just a pause, it was exposure. The courtroom, once filled with polite tension, now felt like a microscope. Carla, seated quietly, could feel her pulse quicken. For months she had replayed this moment in her head, wondering if justice would even matter, but now, watching him stumble, she began to believe it might. The judge set her pen down. "Mr. Chase, your claim of poor quality seems unsupported. You have no complaints, no witnesses, no documentation. What you do have is a signed contract and a confirmed delivery." Nathaniel forced a smile. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I think this is a misunderstanding blown out of proportion." The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mr. Chase, the moment you signed that contract, this became a matter of obligation, not opinion." Her tone didn't rise, but it carried weight. It pressed into the room like gravity. The unraveling Nathaniel's confidence began to fracture. The courtroom's hum, papers shuffling, a cough from the back row, the ticking clock sounded louder now, each second hammering his nerves. Carla's attorney, a composed woman named Lila Chen, stood. "Your Honor, may I present Exhibit B?" The judge nodded. Lila approached the bench with a printed email thread. "This correspondence shows that Ms. Ruiz repeatedly requested payment, and Mr. Chase acknowledged receipt of her invoices, without disputing quality." The judge flipped through the pages. "Mr. Chase, these are your emails?" He exhaled slowly. "They appear to be." She looked over her glasses. "Appear to be?" "They are," he admitted quietly. "In this message," the judge continued, "you said, and I quote, 'Thanks again, Carla. Everyone loved the food. I'll have accounting send payment next week. Do you remember sending this?'" Nathaniel froze. He remembered perfectly, but he hadn't expected her to read it aloud. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, voice barely audible. "So, at that time, you were satisfied with the service?" A pause. "Yes? Then your claim about poor quality is a recent invention?" He shifted in his seat. "I wouldn't call it that." The judge leaned forward slightly, her gaze unrelenting. "Then what would you call it?" Nathaniel looked down. "A misunderstanding." Her reply came sharp and measured. "Mr. Chase, misunderstandings don't come with signed contracts and months of ignored correspondence. They come with conversations. What you've shown this court isn't confusion, it's avoidance. the audience murmured softly. Nathaniel felt heat rise in his neck. His facade was cracking and he knew it. The turning point Lila approached again, her tone calm but firm. Your Honor, Ms. Ruiz has provided not only her records but also delivery confirmations from the event venue. I'd like to submit those as Exhibits C through F. The judge gestured for her to proceed. Accepted. The documents passed from the bailiff to the bench. The judge flipped through them page by page, her expression unreadable, professional, but with a sharpness that could slice through steel. Finally, she looked up. Mr. Chase, you stated that Ms. Ruiz failed to fulfill part of her contract. According to these receipts, every item was delivered, received, and signed for by your event manager. Would you like to revise your statement? Nathaniel glanced at the papers, his hands fidgeting in his lap. Your Honor, I wasn't aware of all the details. My staff handled it. The judge raised an eyebrow. So you're blaming your staff? I'm not blaming anyone, he said quickly. I'm just saying I didn't personally. Then perhaps you shouldn't have personally refused payment, she interrupted. Her voice was calm, but the words hit like a gavel strike. For the first time, Nathaniel was speechless. His practiced composure had turned brittle, and every sentence seemed to make it worse. The judge continued. I've dealt with every kind of defendant, some genuinely mistaken, others willfully deceitful. The difference is humility. One admits when they're wrong, the other performs. She set the papers aside and folded her hands. Mr. Chase, this isn't a performance. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Even the court reporter paused her typing. The moral divide. Carla sat still, eyes glistening but posture straight. She didn't smile or gloat. She simply existed in her truth. The judge turned toward her. Ms. Ruiz, running a small business isn't easy, is it? Carla shook her head. No, Your Honor. Sometimes you go months without knowing if you'll make rent. I've had to sell equipment just to pay staff. But I still show up. I still do the work. I still believe people will honor their word. The judge nodded slowly. And when they don't? Carla hesitated. You learn the hard way who respects you and who just sees you as an invoice. The judge looked back at Nathaniel. Did you hear that, Mr. Chase? He didn't answer. She repeated, firmer this time. Did you hear it? Yes, Your Honor. Good, she said. Because I want you to understand what's really on trial here. It's not a few $1,000s. It's respect. It's integrity. And the idea that someone's time and labor are worth less because they don't wear your kind of suit? Nathaniel's jaw clenched. I never meant, she cut him off. Intent doesn't erase impact. You treated her like she was disposable. But this court doesn't operate on ego. It operates on evidence. Her gavel tapped lightly once, a punctuation mark rather than punishment. Let's proceed to closing statements. The closing Lila stood again, posture confident, but voice steady. Your Honor, this case is simple. A contract was signed. Services were rendered. Payment was refused. Mr. Chase's excuses have shifted with every question, but the evidence hasn't. Ms. Ruiz fulfilled her obligations. She deserves what she earned. The judge nodded, scribbling notes. Thank you, Ms. Chen. She turned to Nathaniel. Mr. Chase, you may respond. He rose slowly. His usual poise had evaporated, replaced by something less certain, almost human. Your Honor, he began. I didn't come here to disrespect Ms. Ruiz. I thought my team had handled it. I didn't realize it would come to this. The judge's eyes softened slightly, but her tone remained steady. And yet here we are. Nathaniel swallowed hard. I'll make it right. Noted, she said. But this isn't about promises. It's about accountability. She leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. I'll review the evidence and issue a ruling. Then, after a pause, she added, But Mr. Chase, one final thought before we adjourn. He looked up. I hope this experience teaches you something your wealth never could. That fairness isn't a privilege. It's a responsibility. After the hearing, the courtroom emptied slowly. Nathaniel lingered by the defense table, staring at the floor as Carla gathered her things. For a moment, they stood in silence. Two people from different worlds bound by the same truth. He finally spoke. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Carla turned, her voice calm but resolute. That's the difference between us, Nathaniel. You didn't mean to hurt anyone, but you did. She walked toward the exit, heels clicking softly against the tile. Before leaving, she looked back once more. You might want to remember this next time you think someone's time costs less than yours. The door closed behind her. Nathaniel stood there, the sound of her footsteps fading, leaving only the echo of the judge's words looping in his mind. Fairness isn't a privilege, it's a responsibility. Reflection later that night, Nathaniel sat alone in his penthouse apartment. The city glittered below, each light a reminder of how small he suddenly felt. The silence was different now, heavier. He replayed the day over and over. The judge's stare, Carla's trembling hands, the weight of his own arrogance collapsing in real time. For years, he had believed justice was for people who couldn't afford better lawyers. Now he knew better. Justice didn't care who he was. It only cared who he'd been when the truth came calling. He poured a drink, but the glass stayed untouched. He picked up his phone, opened his email, and typed a message. "Miss Ruiz, I'm sorry. You were right. Expect payment by morning." He hovered over send, then pressed it. Some debts aren't just paid in money. Some are paid in humility, and in that moment, Nathaniel Chase, heir, businessman, man of wealth, finally understood that real power wasn't in money or charm. It was in owning your mistakes. The next morning, the courtroom was quieter than usual. The same walls, the same judge's bench, but a different energy, charged, expectant, and heavier with consequence. It wasn't just another case on the docket. This one had a pulse. Nathaniel Chase arrived early this time, wearing a darker suit and a face stripped of confidence. He looked smaller somehow, as though the weight of truth had finally found a seat on his shoulders. Carla Ruiz entered moments later, her binder clutched tight against her chest. She wasn't triumphant, just tired. This wasn't victory she sought. It was closure. The bailiff's voice broke the stillness. All rise. The experienced female judge entered, composed, unreadable, her silver hair glinting beneath the courtroom lights. She gave a small nod before taking her seat. "Please be seated." The sound of chairs scraping echoed briefly, then silence fell again. The beginning of the end. The judge shuffled her notes, glancing between both parties. Her voice, calm and measured, carried the authority of someone who'd seen too much to be impressed by theatrics. "This court has reviewed the evidence presented by both sides in Ruiz versus Chase. The facts are clear, the testimony consistent, and the record complete." Nathaniel swallowed hard. The judge's eyes lifted, steady and unblinking. "Before I issue my ruling, I want to make something clear. This isn't just about a debt. It's about principle." She turned slightly toward Nathaniel. "Mr. Chase, wealth can buy comfort. It can buy convenience. But it cannot and will not buy credibility. Credibility is earned. And when you walked into this courtroom, you tried to spend charm and ego where only truth is accepted." Nathaniel lowered his gaze. "Over the past 2 days, this court has heard your explanations, your evasions, and your apologies. None of them changed the facts." She lifted a sheet of paper, reading from the file. "Exhibit B. Your email thanking Ms. Ruiz and confirming satisfaction with her service. Exhibit D. Signed delivery confirmations from your own event manager. Exhibit F. Your subsequent refusal to pay, with no stated cause." Each word hit like a metronome, precise and merciless. "Based on the evidence, this court finds that Ms. Ruiz performed her contractual obligations in full, and that your refusal to pay was both willful and unjustified." A ripple of quiet vindication passed through the room. Carla exhaled, eyes watering, the tension leaving her body like steam from a cooling engine. But the judge wasn't done. "The lesson within the verdict. Mr. Chase," she continued, "you told this court that you didn't mean to cause harm, that it was a misunderstanding. But intention without accountability is just arrogance disguised as innocence." The courtroom was so silent that even the rustle of paper sounded like thunder. "Let me explain something to you," the judge said, her tone sharpening. "In my 20 years on this bench, I've seen people lose their homes, their families, their freedom. And yet the ones who leave here with dignity are the ones who take responsibility. You think humility makes you small. It doesn't. It makes you human." Nathaniel's eyes glistened, but he blinked it back. "Your wealth insulated you from the consequences of carelessness," she said, voice softening slightly. "But not here. Here, everyone stands on the same ground, rich or poor, polished or worn. The law levels the field." She paused, letting the gravity settle. "Therefore," she said finally, "judgment is entered in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Ruiz, in the amount of 28 on 50, plus late fees, interest, and an additional $1,500 for undue hardship. Payment due within 30 days. The gavel came down once, clean, sharp, final. But the echo wasn't just procedural, it was transformative. The moment after Carla covered her mouth, her body trembling, not in shock but in relief. For months she'd been made to feel small. Today the world felt right-sized again. Nathaniel didn't move at first. He stared at the table, the faint reflection of the overhead light shimmering across its surface. His hands, once steady and sure, now trembled slightly. When he finally looked up, his eyes met the judge's. "I understand, Your Honor," he said quietly. She nodded. "I hope you do." Then, unexpectedly, she added, "You remind me of many I've seen before, people raised on power without empathy. But let this case be a lesson, not a label. You can still choose the kind of man you become after this." Her tone wasn't cruel, it was almost compassionate. The kind that could either save or destroy a man depending on what he did next. The mirror court adjourned. Papers shuffled. Chairs scraped again, but Nathaniel didn't leave. Not right away. He stayed seated watching as Carla packed her things. He wanted to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He wasn't sure an apology could bridge the gulf between them, but silence would widen it forever. "Ms. Ruiz," he called softly. She turned, cautious but composed. He stood. "You were right. I treated you like a transaction." Carla said nothing. "I'm sorry," he continued, "not just for the money. For how I made you feel. I thought success made me untouchable. It just made me blind." She studied him for a moment. "I didn't need you to admit that," she said gently. "But I'm glad you did." He nodded, the corners of his mouth tightening, not in pride but in humility. She extended a hand. "Make it right and mean it." He shook her hand, grip firm but unsure. "I will." And in that brief touch, skin to skin, apology to endurance, something shifted. The story that had begun as arrogance was now turning into understanding. The judge's reflection, when the courtroom emptied, the experienced female judge remained seated for a long while. She didn't leave immediately after verdicts. She liked to linger, to let the silence breathe, to let the energy of truth settle into the walls. Her clerk approached quietly. "Long day, Judge?" She smiled faintly. "They're all long days. But some are worth the wait." The clerk hesitated. "You think he'll change?" She looked at the empty chairs, at the faint impression of two people who'd just lived through their reckoning. "I think he's thinking," she said softly. "And that's the first step toward anything real." She rose, gathering her notes. "People come in here believing justice is about punishment. It's not. It's about revelation. You show them who they are and what they still have a chance to become." She closed the file, exhaled and whispered to herself, "Level the field. One case at a time." Then she walked out, leaving only the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights and the echo of truth behind her. The ripple effect outside, reporters had gathered, but neither party stopped to speak. Carla slipped through the doors unnoticed, clutching her paperwork. She didn't want fame, just closure. Nathaniel followed a few minutes later, the flash of cameras catching him mid-step. For once he didn't pose. He didn't smirk. He didn't perform. He just kept walking. Back at his car, he sat behind the wheel, staring at the steering column for a long time. His reflection stared back at him in the windshield, a man stripped of illusion, forced to face himself. He reached for his phone and opened his banking app. A moment later, the full amount was transferred. With a note paid in full, then sincerely sorry, he hit send. Then he sat there, breathing slowly, his hands trembling. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about weight, emotional, moral, human, finally being lifted. The redemption begins that evening. Carla returned to her small catering kitchen. The lights flickered. The air smelled faintly of lemon and roasted garlic. She placed the judgment paperwork on the counter, beside a stack of unpaid bills, and exhaled deeply. Her assistant, Maria, looked up. "How did it go?" Carla smiled for the first time in weeks. "It's over," Maria gasped, hugging her. "You won?" Carla nodded. We both did, in a way. Later, when she was alone, Carla ran her hand across the worn wood of her prep table, the same one she'd bought secondhand 10 years ago. The scratches told a story of perseverance, of nights spent cooking through exhaustion, of dreams that refused to die. She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, No one levels the field for you. You fight until it's even. Epilogue of Justice weeks later. Nathaniel received a handwritten thank you card. Just 2 words inside, debt settled. He read it twice. Then a third time. He didn't deserve her kindness, but he accepted it anyway. That small card sat on his desk for months, right beside a new note he'd written to himself. Respect is the currency that never devalues. He read it every morning before starting his day. And for the first time, he stopped measuring success by wealth and started measuring it by worth. The judge's closing thoughts in her chambers. The experienced female judge sat alone, her reading glasses perched at the edge of her nose. She flipped through her case notes, lingering on one final line she'd written in the margins. Justice isn't about who has more, it's about who has enough to tell the truth. She closed the file, turned off her lamp and whispered one last time before heading home. From silver spoon to small claims. And yet somehow everyone walks away richer. The lights dimmed, the gavel rested, and the balance for one brief perfect moment was restored. The courthouse doors closed with a hollow thud, and just like that, the echo of judgment faded into the outside world. For most people, it was over. Another case finished. Another name crossed off the docket. But for the 2 people who had stood on opposite sides of that courtroom, it was only the beginning of something new, something far more personal. Carla Ruiz stepped into the golden afternoon sunlight, clutching her papers like they were made of gold. The breeze brushed her hair back, and for the first time in months she could breathe. Not shallow survival breaths, the kind you take when the world is pressing down on you, but full, complete ones. She had won. Not just the money, but her dignity. Behind her, the courthouse steps creaked under Nathaniel Chase's shoes. He paused halfway down, watching her cross the plaza. She looked so small from where he stood, but somehow she carried more presence than anyone he'd ever known. He thought about calling out to her. Something polite, something easy. But what could he say that wouldn't sound hollow? Good luck? Sorry again? No. The only thing that mattered now was what he did, not what he said. He turned, hands in his pockets, and walked the other way. The weight of reflection. That night, Nathaniel's penthouse felt emptier than ever. The city glittered outside his window, each light like a reminder of the illusion he'd lived under for so long, thinking success could fill the spaces where humility should have been. He sat on his leather sofa, glass of untouched whiskey in hand. The television played on mute, the news anchor's lips moving without sound. All he could hear was the judge's voice echoing through his head. Intention without accountability is arrogance disguised as innocence. He replayed every moment, his dismissive tone, the way he'd looked at Carla, the way he'd treated her as though her hard work was a mere inconvenience. He picked up his phone and opened his social media. Post after post showed him at charity galas, luxury resorts, and networking events. The version of himself that lived online looked untouchable, but he wasn't. He deleted every single photo. Then he opened his email and typed something new, something he'd never written before. Subject: to every vendor. I owe an apology. I realized recently that professionalism without respect is just performance. If I've ever dismissed your work, undervalued your time, or treated you as less than... I'm sorry. I'm starting over with integrity this time. Nathaniel Chase. He hit send. No PR team, no press release. Just truth, raw and unfiltered. For the first time in years, he felt lighter. Carla's new dawn across town. Carla unlocked the door to her small catering kitchen. The metal handle was warm from the afternoon sun, the familiar scent of roasted coffee and spice filling the air. Her assistant, Maria, was already inside, wiping down counters. Maria looked up and smiled wide. "Boss, you did it!" Carla laughed softly. "We did it." She laid the paperwork down on the prep table, a tangible symbol of every sleepless night, every overdue bill, every moment she almost gave up. Maria handed her a small cup of espresso. "So what now?" Carla took a sip, savoring the warmth. "Now we get back to work." The following weeks passed quietly, almost peacefully. Carla began booking new clients again, this time with clear contracts, deposits up front, and confidence in her worth. She even received a message from an event company who'd heard about her courtroom, courage, and wanted to collaborate, but the best moment came one Friday afternoon when her phone buzzed with a new notification. Incoming transfer. 4765 hours, full payment, including damages. The payment note read simply, as promised. NC Carla stared at it for a long moment. Then she smiled, tears forming as she whispered, "About time." The judge's legacy in her chambers. The experienced female judge sat reviewing the next week's case files. Her clerk entered quietly, placing a fresh stack of folders on her desk. "Another busy week ahead," he said. The judge smiled faintly. Justice doesn't rest. Her clerk lingered for a moment, then said, "That Ruiz case, it's trending online. Someone recorded a clip of your ruling. It's everywhere," she sighed softly. "Of course it is. People are calling it a masterclass in humility," the clerk continued. "You're all over social media." The judge shook her head, amused. "I don't want fame. I want impact," the clerk smiled. "You got both." After he left, she leaned back in her chair, staring at the quiet sunlight filtering through the blinds. So many years, so many cases. Yet every once in a while, one stuck with her. This was one of them. She thought about Carla. The quiet strength it took to stand up against someone bigger, louder, richer. And she thought about Nathaniel. The courage it took to finally look in the mirror and admit he'd been wrong. Two sides of the same coin. The wounded and the awakening. That was the beauty of justice. It didn't just punish. It revealed, she whispered to herself. When people stop hiding behind what they have, they finally find who they are. Then she closed the file. Content that her courtroom had done what it was meant to do. Level the field. The turning point months later, Nathaniel attended a local entrepreneur seminar. Not as a speaker, but as a listener. He sat quietly in the back row, notebook open, taking notes on topics he used to dismiss as soft skills. Afterward, during a break, he noticed a small booth serving coffee and pastries. The logo on the stand caught his eye, Ruiz Catering Co. He froze. Behind the counter, Carla worked efficiently, pouring coffee with her trademark focus. She hadn't seen him yet. He considered walking away. But then he remembered the judge's words. You can still choose the kind of man you become after this. So he stepped forward. Carla finally looked up, and recognition flashed across her face. There was surprise but no hostility. "Mr. Chase," she said evenly. "Please," he replied softly. "Just Nathaniel," she nodded. "Coffee? 2 sugars, right?" he said, smiling awkwardly. She raised an eyebrow. "You remembered," he chuckled. "Hard to forget the person who taught me my biggest lesson." They stood in silence for a beat. Then he said, "I've been trying to do better. I mentor now. Pay on time, show up. You probably don't believe it, but I'm grateful." Carla studied him, seeing sincerity where arrogance used to live. "I don't need to believe it," she said. "Just keep doing it," he smiled. "Deal." When he walked away, she watched him go, not as an enemy, but as proof that even the most privileged can change when faced with truth. The ripple of truth. The clip from their trial became one of the most watched courtroom videos online. Commentators dissected every exchange, turning the judge's words into viral quotes. The law doesn't care what you wear. It cares what you owe. Fairness isn't a privilege. It's a responsibility. Justice doesn't check your bank account. It checks your character. Carla's story inspired thousands of small business owners to stand up for themselves. Nathaniel's humility, in turn, became an unlikely example of redemption. He was invited onto a podcast months later. The host asked, "So what did that experience teach you?" He smiled faintly, choosing his words carefully. "It taught me that power without empathy is useless, and that the smallest courtroom can deliver the biggest reality check." The audience applauded, not because he was rich, but because he was honest. The circle completes a year later. The courthouse was quiet again. The judge sat in her chambers reading a handwritten letter. The return address made her smile. "Dear Your Honor, you once told me that humility doesn't make you small. It makes you human. You were right. I've spent the past year living by that. Thank you for giving me a second chance to be the man my parents hoped I'd be. Sincerely, Nathaniel Chase." The judge placed the letter in her drawer alongside a dozen others, notes from people she'd once ruled against, but who had turned their losses into lessons. Then she poured herself a cup of tea and murmured, "That's the real verdict." The final image, the sun dipped low over the city, painting the courthouse in gold. Carla's catering van passed by, her company logo shining on the side. Inside, she laughed with her staff, music playing softly on the radio. Across town, Nathaniel stood on a construction site, hard hat on, clipboard in hand. He was overseeing a new community center he'd helped fund, a project for local small businesses. For the first time, their lives moved forward, not parallel, but aligned in purpose, because sometimes justice doesn't divide people. It unites them in truth, and long after the gavel's echo fades, the lessons remain. Money doesn't make you powerful. Character does, and when the field is level, everyone stands taller.